Motion. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Moving to what is next? Reports. So we have just 2 reports, I believe, today. So item 8.1 on the agenda, and I'd like to welcome up Mr. Rhys Taylor, who's going to present this report. So the first report we have is it's just providing, actually, before that one, we've got the actions register update, beg your pardon. So the purpose of this report is just to keep on top of the actions that were requested through this committee. So the first one is around the scope of the second climate change role. This has kind of been ongoing, and I do wonder if we should just remove this because it will form part of the long-term plan. Does anyone have an objection to that, or is there a reason why we should keep this on here? No, so I think we might just note that that will form part of the long-term plan discussions. The second action is the Rakitara Revival Program, which we actually we resolved at the last meeting to remove this from the register because progress is intermittent, and we will just provide updates when there is something to update. So that one has been closed. Any other questions on the actions register? No. Okay, so we'll move to item 8.2 and welcome Mr. Rhys Taylor. So this first report is the carbon inventory from TDC operations for the last financial year, and the purpose, sorry, I'm still half asleep from being travelling. Thank you, Mayor Bowen. Happy to move 8.1 that we receive a note that update to the actions registered. Would someone like to second that? Thank you, Councillor Oliver. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you for the reminder, Mayor Bowen. Back to 8.2. So this committee's previously discussed the value of better understanding the greenhouse gas emissions attributed to council operations. So the Climate Change Advisor, Mr. Taylor, has compiled this report, and I'll just invite him to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, councillors. I gather you've got a long day today. So the piece of work we've done has been technically assisted by a team called Toitu EnviroCare, and they provided us with the software and some of the technical advice to allow us to do good quality calculations. And on our first effort this year, we've also invited them to give us independent verification, in effect an audit, to verify that the work we've done is up to an international standard. That was a good learning experience for us and has kept me and others sharp in doing it. I'd like to thank my many colleagues across the council for gathering the information required, because when you're doing this and you're turning over all sorts of stones to see what's underneath them, it's been really interesting finding out what information we had and didn't have. For example, the information we have on our carbon emissions or greenhouse emissions from the wastewater treatment plant is very, very limited. We've had to resort to the lowest level of accuracy, which is looking at the volumes we've handled and applying a multiplier offered to us by Ministry of the Environment based on averages across the whole country. So there are some areas where it'd be really good for us to improve our information gathering quality so that we can truly reflect what happens in our particular circumstance. There are other areas where we've had a really very good amount of detail. For example, we've looked at our vehicle fleet, and we have very accurate records of the fuel burned by those vehicles. We've also asked our colleagues on the staff to share with us their travel arrangements, which is an entirely voluntary thing because their private choice as to how they travel, but 137 of them did so, and that gave us enough to be able to calculate quite reasonably the likely impact. And what surprised me was that the impact on the climate of our workers coming to work is greater than the impact of our vehicle fleet during our work. And on the strength of that, as of today, we're doing our second survey of all the staff to gather information on how they travel, but we're including some carefully worded questions to give us more idea about how they might change that voluntarily, if and when they want to reduce their footprint. And this is important because it's helping to engage the whole team in an issue which is of global importance and on which we often feel we have very little influence. You know, it's a big, worrying international problem. But there are some small things that we can do. And in the reporting process, we've identified several areas where we could potentially improve our efficiency. there are certainly some opportunities that we spotted for reducing our expenditure on electricity. And although the carbon impact of that is quite small, because New Zealand is famous for its ability to generate from renewable sources, still about 20% of the energy that we're using in electricity is coming from burning gas or burning coal. And so we can still make a difference on a small scale. The areas where we can probably make most change would be in the vehicle fleet and the staff commuting, in the power bills, and in building and construction work. We did some rough estimates on the likely impact of our contractors, again using multipliers that have been developed mainly from Auckland by the Ministry for the Environment, and we were able to look at the spend and convert that into a likely impact. But we could actually be more detailed in our work in the future, looking at our own building construction projects to reduce two aspects. One is what's called the embodied carbon, so that's the carbon effect of the materials you've used, such as concrete and steel, and the operational use, which is where we come back to things like power bills and so on. So internally, I'm hoping that my advisory role will include an opportunity to advise and encourage colleagues to be quite frugal in their investment, so that they're investing in order to reduce operating costs. I feel that's consistent with the pressures on us as a council to be cost effective. I'll stop at that, Madam Chairman. I think we have to take the report as read. It's relatively long and detailed. There's over 30 pages of it, but it's on the record now, and there may be questions you want to raise.
Thank you, Mr Taylor. Are there any questions? Councillor Scott.
I thought it was a really good read, so thank you very much, very detailed. Just around that survey, when that out to voluntary, staff, it would be interesting to put in the distance travelled to work, because we're urban based.
That's right.
Some will travel 30 k's. They could bike. I wouldn't. Versus, they might be 4 k's, because that can make a big shift.
Very much, Councillor Scott. Yes, the survey does ask them both the length of time of their travel to work and the kilometres of their travel to work. It asks what mode of travel they're using as their main one and their secondary one, and so on. So it's quite a detailed survey, and it's going to give us the ability to offer useful advice targeted on the people who can make use of that information.
Mayor Bowen.
Thanks. And Mr Taylor, when do we do the next measure? Is it in 2 years' time? Is it?
The value of doing this baseline is to focus on the areas of most. I don't think we should make a fetish of doing a lot of number gathering constantly. It's expensive in staff time and maybe external help. I would recommend that we certainly revisit this in 2 years. And I'd suggest that since we've had an audited process for this first time, if we use basically the same methods and the same software, then we can keep the record in a comparable form and produce a report which compares our picture a couple of years on.
Mr Taylor, could you just give us an indication of the cost to council of this? Because obviously that will determine how regular we want to undertake the work.
The software and support, technical support, was $11,000. The audit and valuation about $7,000, so about 18 for the two. The cost principally, though, is in my time and the time of my colleagues in gathering the information. I should add that we've had agreement from the management of TDHL and Venture Timaru that for their office-based operations, they will share their data with us so they can be included next time.
And did you, from this report, kind of get a couple of key actions that we might be able to take forward and even incorporate into the climate change strategy that we're working on in the background?
I mentioned that there's an opportunity for direct action in the car fleet and in staff commuting. My personal enthusiasm would be for us trying to move the car fleet at a reasonably good pace into hybrid vehicles or battery vehicles. The challenge there for us is the capital cost of making that transition, because we've generally been purchasing vehicles rather than leasing them. But perhaps we could open opportunity for leasing as well. So I think that's an area to explore, and I'd recommend that we explore that. In terms of power savings, yes, I think there are going to be some opportunities to increase the efficiency of operation. If you're, for example, switching from using LPG gas, which we are at one of our facilities, towards heat pumps, then you have a capital investment cost, but you then have a much lower operating cost, and you have a greenhouse gas saving. So areas like that. I'd like us to look at building. I've had some very constructive conversations with the team who look after our council housing stock, and have said that they're looking seriously now at using solar electric plus a battery to provide a better service to the tenants of that housing. So that's another area that we're considering. And there may well be commercial suppliers who will put in the capital equipment for us rather than us having to pay for the equipment.
But on that housing, does that count in our footprint or not? Because is that not the tenant responsible? I know in the big picture it will help the environment, but will it help when you come back in 2 years with a...
It will help because the operation of those properties can be included in our footprint as the property owner. If it were a private house, then no, but it's part of our asset base.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Jackson.
Thanks for the report, Rhys. It was really thorough. And I learnt, because I didn't know this beforehand, but carbon dioxide is 30 times less damaging than methane. So, yeah, it was great to learn that.
Damaging than methane, yes. The percentage of the least damage depends on the period of time you're looking at. Methane lasts a much shorter time in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide.
Yes.
So ultimately, carbon dioxide is what is heating the planet the most.
Right.
But
So
in the short term, then methane is very important. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, with the climate strategy, like how far down the road are we compared to other councils?
There's enormous variation in terms of making strategies for climate work. There are councils who haven't made a start. There are some like us who put a big burst of effort into our first year of work with an external consultant, which is rather paused now because we've done part of the job, but we haven't finished it. And there are some councils who started 3 or 4 years ahead of us and have published their strategies. But they tend to be the much larger councils, the likes of Hamilton or Wellington.
Positive too is though now we're aligning ourselves with the Canterbury strategy, and so I think we're in a good space to work alongside that. So I think the great work that has been done, the next steps will align quite well regionally.
So long as we leverage that work and not duplicate it, that is the challenge. Yeah, I think Councillor Booth had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, Councillor White, Chairman. Rhys, so does this go towards, this report, does this go towards identifying what our liability is around carbon credits that we need to purchase?
Not necessarily, Councillor Booth. The government's not requiring us to purchase carbon credits to offset our emissions. I'm quite pleased of that because I'd much rather we focused on reducing our emissions than buying offsets for them. So we're not present obliged to. If we wish to pay for offsetting, then the scale of that could be quite expensive. The only area in which we are obliged to buy carbon credits and surrender them is the technical phrase for this, where you purchase the carbon credit and then hand it back, so you spent the money, is for our methane emissions estimated from the landfill, which we're doing on behalf of all the landfill of the whole population, but we're doing it as the council. And at present, that cost of offsetting is a figure I can share with you. It is public information. So they do it by calendar year rather than our administrative year. In the calendar year 2022, the end of that year, we paid 35,925 carbon units. Their value was 2,798,494. That's a big spend. So the payment of purchasing carbon credits and surrendering them to offset is a very good incentive for us to reduce our carbon emissions from the landfill. And prior to my arrival, colleagues here took the very sensible step of installing a methane collection system in the landfill, which I'm sure you've looked at in your infrastructure work. And that flare is now operating. It needs 1 year's operating experience and data, and then a new emission calculation can be accepted for Timaru, which will be lower. because we're converting that methane into carbon dioxide. So
what-
we'll reduce our liability and therefore save money.
So what sort of saving would you anticipate with the methane burn?
I don't know until we have the data. As a scientist, I'm waiting to see the data. It depends on how much we collect and how much we burn, Councillor Booth, but it will be to our advantage to have that equipment installed.
You mentioned also about this air housing and that you were down the ways of looking at changing the energy, the batteries, etc. And so what capital cost are you thinking about per unit for that?
The idea is that it be a trial run of a small number of units, perhaps 4. It would involve using a supplier of battery and solar panels who provides the capital investment, but then ties you to a long-term contract for the supply of electricity. So we'd be amortizing the capital cost by paying an operating cost. So that way it doesn't actually give us a large capital bill, but it's just a trial run to see if it's technically possible and if it works for the tenants.
Sure. Thank you.
Just before we go to Councillor Burt, just going back to the waste, surely the message is the less we send to landfill, the less emissions we have, as opposed to what we can convert to carbon.
Agreed entirely. Thinking upstream, you might say, the less organic material we put into landfill rather than put into composting or divert for recycling, the less we put in, the less methane we'll generate. So absolutely, it's in the public's interest as well as the environment's interest for the material be composted. From that point of view, the central government decision recently to alter the ground rules for composting is actually a backward step.
I think Councillor Burt had a question.
Just a clarification in regard to the software that we purchased, or did we purchase that? Is it a one-off cost and can be used now going forward? Obviously, incremental updates.
Software as service, Councillor Burt, we pay a subscription to that software. So it will be a continuing cost for us. It's not a massive cost. It's certainly an effective way of us being able to do it ourselves. If we paid someone to do all the work for us, we pay a much, much larger cost.
So naively, you're talking $11,000 a year, or it was an upfront cost with an ongoing incremental maintenance fee for it?
The cost of subscribing to the software would be either an annual fee or a biannual fee, depending on what we can negotiate with the firm. I'm waiting for your advice from today, but I've arranged an online meeting with the company in a few days' time.
Yes. So sorry, the 11K that we spent buying into it,
Yep.
is that the ongoing annual fee?
That was an annual fee.
All right.
That's right, yes. There wasn't a big entry cost. Yeah.
Yeah, Mayor Barn.
It probably crosses this, but since it was raised here and we talked about it this morning, but I think it probably crosses into infrastructure as well. But we discussed fleet review some time ago, probably 2 councils ago. I think probably only Councillor Burt, Councillor Parker and myself that were involved in that. So it's probably timely that we request a workshop to look at fleet review across cost and perhaps some of the conversations that we've had today as well.
But that won't be an action for this committee, will it? Will it
Well,
be
it doesn't really, in my view, sits as long as the action is actioned.
So do we want to record that as an
Yeah.
action in this committee?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, I'm comfortable. It does really, to your point, sits in infrastructure, but I don't think it matters where the request comes from.
So long as it gets
Yeah.
captured. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Mayor Nigel. In Councillor Booth, another question. No,
Just really wondering, you may or may not be able to answer this, but are we recovering that $80 a tonne for the carbon credit that we're actually paying for? What are we, for the solid waste that we're actually, are we ensuring that we're covering our cost there?
Can't answer that question. We could ask the waste manager if light can be shed on that either now or subsequently.
looks like Mr Dixon's going to come and share some information on that.
Yes, thank you. The carbon cost of carbon basically is covered it was added into the fees and charges and includes also added into our rates, the targeted rate for the waste collection. So any reduction in that will create savings.
I think, if I may though, Mr Dixon, the issue we will see later in the council papers is that the fees and charges are not covering the true cost of waste collection in this region, which is a conversation for this afternoon's meeting.
Yes, that is correct, and it's all about how we calculate, well, it's the balance between rates versus fees and charges. That is where the correction needs to be made.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so the recommendation is that the Environmental Services Committee receive the 22-23 baseline year, carbon inventory for council operations, and consider the baseline year carbon inventory as a foundation and use it to inform policy decisions about future mitigation of carbon emissions. So that's been moved by Mayor Bowen. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Jackson. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So, Mr Taylor, I think you're presenting the next report, if you'd just like to stay there. So the next report is the adoption of the climate change response policy. So we had a draft of this presented to us late last year, and Mr Taylor's just going to give us an update on that and seek this committee's approval to adopt the policy. Thank you, Mr Taylor.
Thank you again, councillors. The great advantage for us in having a climate change response policy is it helps us to coordinate our efforts within the council. The role that I'm holding is only as useful as the extent to which the management and governance back the role. You know, you can do very little as an individual, but as a team you can achieve a lot. And so the idea of the policy is it will guide us on where we put our priorities of effort. And the updates you have here are relatively modest, but they're based on consultation that we've done over the last few months. We've had a lot more discussions internally with members of the teams here and had their guidance. We've had a couple of external discussions. We've had some input from Community and Public Health. We've had some input from Arafenua through the consultancy team that they use. And we're in a position now where I think we have sufficient development of policy that we can put this into action and then make sure it is reviewed. I would suggest about 2 or 3 years hence, when we next come round into the long-term planning cycle. In terms of any updates that came subsequent to this paper, only one, which is a very minor change in wording suggested from Arafenua under point 5 of the policy. So page 54 of your papers, under point 5, which is to say collaborate with rather than extend collaboration to. It's a minor rewording, but I have no objection to it being reworded as they've proposed to us. Collaborate with Mana Whenua. Apart from that, I have no other additions offered to me as late items, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Piddington.
I've just got one question, and I believe climate change is real, but should governance be included in the scope of this? Because we could have a climate denier elected council, and you're forcing them into this. I'm just not sure how Alan. I'm just worried genuinely about the scope that we can, as elected members, we're bound by something that we may not agree with.
Madam Chair, on a question of principle, I think I turn to you or the Mayor for guidance on this, but I can offer you an opinion if you want me to.
You raise a good point, Councillor Piddington. I wonder if the scope should be this body as opposed to the individuals who make up this body, being the councillors. Any other views on that?
There's collective responsibility, but we may all have differing views as we do on a number of things, and I'm just concerned.
You raise a good point. And so, is everyone happy with that suggested amendment if the scope is changed to the governing body rather than the individuals of the governing body. I'm sure you can word that more eloquently than I can, Mr. Taylor. Are there any other questions? I did just have one that I wanted to just raise, and I probably don't have a strong view on it, but I just wanted to make sure this committee was comfortable with it. So at point 2, we are proposing that we prepare and publicly report at intervals of no greater than 2 financial years the carbon emissions inventory or footprint, which is the report that we've just received previously from Mr. Taylor. So is everyone comfortable that we're committing to do that at least every 2 years, or did we want to be have a different period in there, or just say periodically or on a regular basis? Any views, or are we happy to leave that as it is?
I'm with you. I think it should be regularly, and we can decide that, because otherwise someone will bring this to us in a couple of years' time and say, you haven't done it and you said you would. So I think we should give ourselves some flexibility.
Thank you, Councillor Piddington. I'll just go to Councillor Booth and then come back to Mr. Taylor.
I guess only if there's been changes made that you'd like to measure. So if nothing's changed, what's the point?
Mr. Taylor?
The advice, Madam Chair, we've had through the Auditor General is that councils are actively encouraged to do such regular footprinting. We're not yet legally bound to do so. The Climate Commission would probably like us to be legally bound to do so. So the encouragement we're receiving from central government has been to be methodical about this and to do regular assessments. In proposing 2 yearly, I was thinking of the work staff load, and that it needs to be done frequently enough that you remember how you did it.
Could I suggest a compromise which is at regular intervals that we propose every 2 years, whereas we're not actually bound to having to do it every 2 years, but that is the intention? Sorry, I didn't word that very well. Do you follow my train of thought, Mr. Taylor? So if we say prepare and publicly report at regular intervals, and maybe in brackets, proposed to be every 2 years. And then to Councillor Piddington's, we have a little bit of flex if we don't do it, but the intention is that we do it every 2 years. It just worries me that if in future, and I wouldn't like to see this, but if, as a result of a long-term plan or something, we didn't have that position there and we didn't have the capability to do it, I would not like to see that. I'm not recommending this, Mr. Taylor, but it does kind of bind us to something that we may not be able to deliver on in future. Any other comments? Anything else to add before we move to the resolution, Mr. Taylor?
No, I'm hoping that this is going to be a very useful tool for us in our work, and the timing is such that by adopting this policy, it can form part of the guidance internally for the long-term plan.
Yeah. So I appreciate the work that's gone into this, and I think it is, like you say, a good step to have this as the founding document to guide us. So with that, I'll move to the recommendation, which is that we approve and adopt the climate change response policy, noting the amendments discussed in the meeting, if that's okay, being the feedback from our whenua, the inclusion of council as opposed to councillors, and the intervals of every 2 years being proposed as opposed to have to. Is everyone comfortable with that? Can I have on Mayor Bowen?
Sorry, may I suggest that as a point 2 is that it comes back to the chair for sign-off?
That the chair of this committee, being myself, will have sign-off on the final policy, which will only be those 3 minor amendments. So a mover, thank you, Mayor Bowen, and a seconder, thank you, Councillor Scott. Any other discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. It's a
Thank
good
you.
milestone for council, so well done on your work.
Yes, it's welcome. If I could be allowed just a quick word in conclusion from my angle. I've been thinking hard, obviously, in this first year or so of my work about the challenges of responding to a rapidly changing climate. The rate of change and the scale of the impact has actually become more anxiety generating, in this year. The problem we face is that what most of us are looking for are security, quick fixes, things basically staying the same, lots of solutions and simplicity and things within our previous experience. But in practice, what we're experiencing is a time of uncertainty, that things are difficult or confusing, that there may have to be quite large-scale social or economic changes in response. Many questions are being raised as answers, and it's really complex. And that's quite difficult for structures such as local government to respond to. So I'm expecting that in our work on this, and certainly in our thinking on this in the long-term plan, that envisaging or imagining the changes needed within that 10-year horizon is going to be quite a stretch, because we'll be very tempted to go for business as usual. And my recommendation to you is that we don't do business as usual, because we're going to have to change faster than that. So that's just the parting thought on this one.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have no urgent business, no minor nature and no public forum, so I can close the meeting at 10:40. Thank you very much, everyone.